All right, welcome back to the program. My guest is joining me right now virtually. He is Mr. Ben Akabueze, the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation. Welcome to the program, sir, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Nancy. It's my pleasure.
Okay, let's get started, sir. And let me start on the premise of how is this 2024 budget different from the others? Can I see the DG, please? You've been the Director General of the Budget Office now for nearly 8 years. I think since President Jonathan, if I'm not mistaken, towards the
No,
later
no,
part.
not
Is
quite.
it towards the
No,
later
no,
part of Jonathan?
no. President Buhari.
Okay, but I think you took over from Dr. Bright, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it? So, but we
There
are
were actually two quick appointments between Bright and myself.
exactly, so
So
e-
both
ex-
of us spent under 6 months before.
exactly. So where I'm going to with this question is, you have been there for a while, close to 8 years now. So you've served. You're almost serving the second president now. You're serving the second president. So how is this budget different from the others? Away from the theme of 2024 budget being that of renewed hope.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Every budget reflects, to a significant extent, the posture, the policy, thrust of the administration that is in place. Clearly, I think that between the immediate past administration and this one, um, it's evident that the current government is more bullish in terms of reforms, driving the pace of reforms. So if you take oil subsidy removal that we have been, grappling with. It's always been accepted that it was the thing to do ultimately, but the current administration got it done, and that's a big game changer in terms of the government's fiscal, situation. So you will see that, thrust or to drive reforms reflected, that the consequential ambition, arising therefm, you will find reflected in the 2024 budget. So you see, for instance, that we are a lot more bullish in terms of, oil production targets.
Okay, I will come back to subsidy later and perhaps the bullishness that is seen in this administration as a result of this 2024 budget. Now, the question a Nigerian might really ask is that this budget is that of renewed hope. How has this budget been crafted to restore hope to Nigerians? Because in the last few years, it's been really that of turbulence, of course, turbulent storm, challenges and all of that. So how has this budget been crafted to involve you and I as citizens?
Well, again, as I said, this budget, is more bullish in terms of reform agenda. But to answer your specific question, how it's been crafted to impact, more on, the citizens. First of all, in terms of the spending amount, you can see that, there's a significant increase in, spending, proposals, and this is still, I'm always first to admit that this is still a far cry from the sort of numbers that we should be aiming at. But when you look at it, begin with the social sector, education and health, significant increases in expenditures, to those sectors. Okay, significant increase in expenditure on security and defense, which and these are the things that really impact, that, the common man, you and I, whatever, everybody on the street. We all want a more secure environment, and you can see progress being made in that respect, and also a more hands-on posture in managing the economy. That's what part of what you see. And then it's not just about significant increases in expenditure limits. So in the education sector, for instance, you see the introduction of a student loan, a student loan fund to ensure that no intelligent Nigerian child is denied the opportunity of higher education because of the financial circumstances of the family. That's something new. You will also find in this 2024 budget a proposal, a provision for what is called the uh, uh, um, uh, pardon me
Yeah.
now, but this is having a senior moment. But
It's okay.
consumer, consumer credit, consumer credit, okay, funding to basically drive the growth of consumer banking, to support consumer credit in the country. What that does is enable people to be able to meet certain needs that they have on a more timely basis, because they have access to to credit. But what it also does is support the industrial sector, the in fact in this sector in particular, because it increases demand for their goods. If you take some of the developed economies, if you take out consumer credit from some of these developed economies, the size of the GDP will shrink significantly. So this is something again that is new in the 24 budget. Again, while remaining committed to the social investment programs, you can see that there's a drive to make those programs more efficiently run, more impactful. So there is, continuing provision for, funding of those programs, so that in the interim, while government is, doing all of these things to improve the environment, create the environment for, investments that will create jobs and whatever. The reality is that there are poor and vulnerable people, in our midst, who can't wait for all of this to come in, because they've got to survive on a daily basis. And so, as is normal with governments all over the world, there's a program to to give them a helping hand, at least at some subsistence level. And that's basically the rationale for retaining programs like the conditional cash transfer programs and other such social investment programs, but to make them more effective and use them also to drive the attainment of other policy objectives, like you know uh, uh, um, access to financial services, you know increasing that, and rather than just paying out cash. Any way to bring these people into the formal financial services sector.
Okay, DG, I was also thinking along the lines of your explanation as to what the impact of this budget will be for Nigerians. And my next question to you is, if you take a look at this 2024's budget, which is 28.7 trillion naira, you alluded to the fact that it's higher, but if we take a look at it, even in dollar terms, because of the depreciation the naira has experienced in the past few years, is still less than 10% of our GDP. So when you were crafting this budget, you and your team, how did you look at this in terms of percentage to GDP? That's one. Then number two, you actually also mentioned earlier while you were speaking that we have a 28.7 trillion naira budget for 2024, but we should even do better. What kind of budget should we be aiming for? I've spoken to many analysts on this show, many professors, many CEOs and all of that. And they tell me that, Nancy, we have a capacity to be doing like 50 trillion naira budget a year. So what is the figure that we should be looking at, and how do we get there, and when do we hope to get there?
You know, talk is cheap. Anybody can. I've heard, I mean, say 50 trillion. I've heard people say 100 trillion. But the question is how. Let me show you how to get, how to get there. So that's one. Number two is, I think that and I'm trying to find the word, a word other than simplistic, to describe the attempt to simply, divide the budget by the current exchange rate, and then say this is the dollar. First of all, we're not in a dollar economy, okay? And if you wanted to really do that, compare budgets, okay, across different country budgets or whatever, what you will use is not the market exchange rate, but what is called the purchasing power parity rate, for instance. Okay, and if you use that, because look, the reality is today, okay, $1 is on the market is 1,000 naira plus. If you had 1,000 naira plus today, okay, you could actually get a decent meal depending on where you go to eat. If you have $1 in the United States, you can't even buy a can of there's nothing you can get to eat for that price. So people simply dividing by the exchange rate and saying that that's not how these things work. But to answer your question about what, you bet that the government, if government could see its way to a 50 trillion naira budget, it would. But now we are in a situation where we've also, there are concerns being expressed about how do you fund your budget. There are broadly four ways. Okay, you've got your revenues, okay, which whether from tax or from natural resources. Okay, then you have revenues or receipts coming from programs like privatization, or asset sales or asset concessioning programs. You've got then resources coming in from aid and grant, and then you've got debt to fill in the gap. Okay, we believe that we have been fairly bullish in the first three targets, the revenue sources, but there is now, and everyone shares that concern, that we've got to keep a tight eye on debt sustainability, and therefore that we cannot run deficits at the level at which we run them in. And so there's, the deficit, yes, 2024 is still a deficit budget, but the deficit is trending down, and that's what the government intends to do over the medium term. Boost revenue, reduce the deficit, and consequently the level of additional debt that is being taken on. And within that context, we cannot immediately see our way through a budget larger than the 28.7 trillion for 2024.
DG, let's go back a bit to 2023 budget. What would you say is the execution rate so far, bearing in mind that the president signed a 2.2 trillion naira supplementary budget for 2023 that will run till March of this year, and we already have a 2024 budget of 28.7 trillion naira. So how does this work, that both budgets are running concurrently? That's one. The other question is, if we take a look at the targets so far, you talked about even revenue earlier. Our revenue projections in the last few years, we've not met it. You would agree with me on that, and especially as we've also had deficit. So if you take a look at the 2023 budget, for example, the assumptions we had, like inflation 17.16%, we didn't meet it. Our FX rate too, we did not meet, and all of that. So if you take a look at all of this, how does 2023 budget run concurrently with the 2024 budget and that supplementary budget. Let me take you back to it that the president signed, 2.2 trillion naira. On what FX rate was it predicated on? Because 2023 budget, ab initio, was predicated on 435 naira, I think 35 kobo, as against the dollar for 2023. Now, the president signed 2.2 trillion in November of this year. What FX rate was it on? Because the central bank had already devalued the currency. So how did you do that? How did you align it? Doctor, you know what I'm talking about, DG. I'm used to calling you doctor. I don't know, but.
Well, first of all, there were two supplementary budgets. There was one for 819.5, and then there was the one for 2.2 trillion, 2.16 trillion. Both, okay, were purely expenditure, incremental expenditure provisions. So there was no incremental revenue on that side. So, when you talk about exchange rate, therefore, it's not the exchange rate impact on those will be, okay, for instance, the 2.2 trillion naira budget included significant amounts of defense expenditure, which, the procurement of equipment, which are mostly imported, and therefore, the costs there in the budget will reflect their current price at current market, exchange rate. But otherwise, the exchange rate didn't have any impact on the supplementary budgets because they were simply additional expenditures. There was no provision for additional revenues. They were to be both funded by additional domestic debt.
Yeah, but DG, if you take a look at that, I guess that the 2.2 trillion was for like capital expenditure, if I'm not mistaken, the supplementary budget for payments and all of that. So I'm thinking, yes, I'm thinking where inflation, because if your contractors will be giving you receipts, they are giving you receipts now not based on the 435 initially projected for 2023. So
we're saying the same thing. I'm saying
okay.
that the cost of the items captured in the supplementary budget reflected their current prices.
Okay.
And therefore the exchange. So it's not a question of what exchange rate you are assuming. It's a question of what is the invoice price for that item at that day, and what the supplier will be invoicing you at that date will be the current market rate, not your budget assumption.
Okay, now let's move over to the issue of fiscal discipline. DG, what challenge do we have? Do we have a revenue challenge or do we have a spending challenge? Because a lot of people have said we can make all the money we want, but we are not even spending rightly. That is the issue.
Well, I think that it's fair to say we have a problem, both, of revenue and spending, okay? On the spending side, the problem is one of not that we're spending too much money, as some people they think. Indeed, as you yourself have expressed earlier on, we're actually spending, way below what we should be spending. So what we need to fix is the efficiency of that, spending. But the scale of the spending efficiency problem, pales into near insignificance compared to the scale of our revenue problem. Okay, so that's the point that we need to, to keep in mind. When you decompose the expenditure and take what we call non-discretionary expenditure, which includes personnel costs, it includes debt service, and some basic, amounts that you need to be able to run, government and to secure, the nation. When you take all of those out, the amount that you have left, which is, amount available for discretionary spending, is is you know is small, and that's why we're not able to fund a lot more in terms of delivery of public goods and services. But the reason why we're in that situation is because we're not generating enough revenues that then gives you, see, the more revenues you get, the higher your capacity to spend, not just the revenues you're generating, but your capacity to take on additional debt should you need to. And so ultimately it impacts your capacity to serve your people. And so that's why oftentimes we say that our principal problem is a revenue one.
So how do you enforce accountability, and how do you enforce value for money? That is one. The second question is, do you work with your counterpart, for example, in the Auditor General's office? Because over the years, we've seen in different budgets, you will see the same line item, or you will see some agencies that are not, for example, an agency, you will see road, doing road for the agency, and you know clearly that the agency is not supposed to be building roads. So how do you work with your counterpart, perhaps Auditor General Office, to ensure value for money and accountability, as well as effective expenditure?
Yes, of course, there's significant interagency, collaboration, okay? And then, so yes, I mean, we work with each other and take, input from each other. And then, of course, the Auditor General's reports are, significant, part of what informs expenditure plan. If the report, for instance, reflects, increasing profligacy in a particular agency, we will be mindful of that in the subsequent budget. But, I've tried to explain this thing about repeated expenditure, severally, but, maybe I'll keep doing so until the point gets, driven home. Because as we have stated, government revenues are inadequate to support expenditures at the level that we should be having. If you have an agency, for instance, that is employing, let's say the agency has, 1,000 people, and they determine that they need about 500 computers to be able to do their work at the ratio of 2 persons per system. But the reality of our budget is that agency cannot get funding for more than 100 computers for the year, whereas they need 500. What you will then see is that over the medium term, we will make provision to fund 100 computers annually for that agency over the next 3 years, for instance. So you will see that reflected in their budget over the medium term. Every year you will see 100 computers. But that 100 computers is not a repeated expenditure.
Yes, DG, I understand
it's
that.
It's a progressive attempt to meet their needs.
I understand that.
Yes.
I understand that. I'm just saying that we've also seen, was it we're already in 2024. I think 2022 budget, for example, was it 2022? An agency even under the Agric Ministry, supposedly.
I was going to address that.
Okay,
because
okay,
I was
go ahead.
the question of
Yes,
repeat expenditure.
yes, okay.
Okay, yeah, so you have, sometimes you see expenditures popping up in the budgets of, agencies where that line of activity is not in their core mandate. I can guarantee you that whenever you see that, it's come from the input of, the National Assembly that are part of the process of the budget making. The budget that goes from the executive to the National Assembly will not have that. You will not see an agency put a project that is outside its mandate area. And if they did, we would not pass it.
But does that make it right?
Well, I think that the question, you're addressing the question to the wrong person.
Because you are the DG of the budget office. Does that make it right? And I'm wondering what kind of engagement you will be having, perhaps because you are the executive. I wonder what kind of engagement
the reality is what you see is some of those, and that's what has happened in the last few years. Okay, is that where we find that the ICPC, goes in, IPC works with us in reviewing, doing a post, budget passage review. When some items are identified, the ICPC, in exercise of its power, directs the agency not to implement such projects.
Okay. This 2024 budget is a deficit budget. That means that expenditure will be more than revenue. But we've also seen that deficit is also trending lower, like you mentioned earlier. How will this deficit be funded? I know that there is a part of borrowing. I know that that would also escalate the debt service to about, I think this year, to about 45%. But I won't ask you any question on debt. Questions for debt will be directed to Madam Patience Oniha subsequently. But I want to ask you really how we came to this, because I've also heard, the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning on different fora speak about the deficit, as well as even Minister Wale Edu.
Well, essentially, okay, the deficit is going to be largely funded by new, borrowings and drawdowns on existing multilateral and bilateral debt. There's a little under 300 billion naira of that is projected to be funded by privatization proceeds. Okay, but let me make the point that what we've done, gone out there, is put out what you see as your worst case, situation. Government is, as I said, accelerating the pace of, reforms like, privatization and stuff like that. And so there is a possibility that a lot more will come from, those sources and reduce, therefore, the level of borrowings that will happen. In 2023, for instance, and that's the point that we need to make, just because the budget makes provision for deficit and consequential borrowing doesn't mean that government goes ahead to do so. The 2023 budget, for instance, when you add on the supplementary budgets, it's a cumulative of 24.8 trillion naira. That 24.8 trillion naira included an aggregate deficit to be funded by, deficit to be funded mainly by debt of 13.8 trillion. But as of November this year, our budget, our deficit is barely, about 6 trillion naira. On a pro rata basis, it should have been double that. Essentially, government has slowed down on certain, expenditures, okay, wherever it can, to reduce the necessity to borrow and the level of borrowing. So whenever you see deficit, it's not necessarily that, we're going to max out on that deficit. Government itself is also concerned to keep that as low as it can. And to, if in the course of the year, revenues perform above target, then you have two policy options. Apply the additional revenues to reduce the deficit, or, send in supplementary, spending proposals.
Okay, you talked about earlier on about government-owned enterprises. What is it like working with MDAs and GOEs submitting their budgets for public scrutiny as well as evaluation? Because we've also seen some kind of opaqueness around withholding information about their earnings as well as their expenditures. You will not really see perhaps breakdowns from some MDAs and some GOEs. How do you navigate around this? Because some we've also seen a bit are not really there in the 2024 budget.
Well, again, up until like 5 years ago, the budgets of the GOEs were not captured in the federal government's budget. And then we said this is not right. And we embarked on a reform to begin to capture their budget as part, to integrate their budget in the federal government's budget. And we've done so for 5 years now. And every year, these are the budget in over the last 5 years, the budget that Mr. President lays before the National Assembly includes the budget for the GOEs. Okay, but the Assembly itself is also going through a process of organizing its processes to be able to process the budgets of the GOEs simultaneously with the budgets of the MDAs. But for 2024, if you go to the budget office website, you will see the budgets of the GOEs, the 63 GOEs whose budgets are consolidated in that of the federal government. The budgets are, on the website of the budget office. If you go to the websites of those individual agencies, you should also see greater details about their budget, there.
Yeah, because I'm not seeing, I don't know, but the last time I checked, I did not see the budget of, for example, NPA, NIMASA, security printing and co. I don't know if as at now, if it's there. But the last time I checked, it wasn't there.
I don't know the last time you checked, but it's been there for weeks now. But security printing, you will not find there. The Nigerian Security Printing and Minting Company is a subsidiary of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Yeah. You will also not find the budget of the Central Bank of Nigeria on our website, nor in the budget. It is not global, globally, it is not considered acceptable or best practice to consolidate the budgets of central banks and national oil companies in the government's budget. You wouldn't find any country around the world that does that. So when we talk about GOEs, it does not include the CBN and any of its subsidiaries. It does not include NNPC and any of its subsidiaries. Okay. But those organizations individually, if you go to their website, they ought to be able to put out all of this information. And you will recall that for many years, the accounts of NNPC were not audited. But since 2020, we've brought the NNPC audits current now.
In fact, NNPC just said that they made a profit of about, is it about 2 trillion naira? But that will be question to Mele Kyari. Now, DG, what kind of budgeting are we undertaking? And I'm asking this question intentionally because I know that when President Buhari came in, we were set to embark on, is it zero budgeting? You have zero.
Zero-based budget.
Yeah, zero-based budget. Which one are we doing now? Is it zero or we've gone back to envelope?
Well, first of all, again, I think that there's some miscommunication in terms of terms there. We are doing zero-based budgeting, okay? But zero-based budgeting entails envelopes. And so does any public sector budgeting system anywhere in the world. What are envelopes? Envelopes are simply spending ceilings, okay? First, as I said earlier, when you take the aggregate of your revenues and then your debt, what the debt that you plan to take, that establishes an aggregate envelope, an aggregate ceiling on how much you can spend. For 2024, that ceiling is 28.7 trillion. You now take that 28.7 trillion, and based on government's the overarching development plan, government's priorities, government's current commitments, you then parcel those out into ceilings for individual MDAs. That's what is called envelopes. There is no known public sector budgeting in the world that doesn't entail envelopes. But I think that there was a miscommunication ab initio when the zero-based budgeting was introduced. I think some people thought that that was freedom from the envelope system. And so in the first year of the zero-based budgeting, when preparing the budget for 2016, the total budget for that year was just over 5 trillion naira. Just one sector alone submitted spending plan of over 7 trillion naira because they thought zero-based budgeting means no more ceilings. So that's not what it means.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification.
Zero-based budgeting simply means, so that I don't just say what it doesn't mean without saying what it means. What it means is that every year, as you're preparing the budget of every year, conceptually, all the lines in the budget are assumed to have zero amounts. There's no predetermined amount that you're bringing forward, which is what happened under incremental budgeting. Under incremental budgeting, you simply say, oh, last year we spent 100 naira on this. This year, okay, inflation and this and blah, we will spend 120. No, with zero-based budgeting, every line of expenditure has to be, rejustified de novo every year. You have to look at it and say, okay, yes, this line may have been in the budget for the last 10 years. Is there a justification for it to remain? That's simply what a zero-based budget approach to budgeting means.
Okay, let's talk about the service-wide votes, which we've actually also seen expand over the years. And service-wide votes, of course, is seen as contingency fund to address, especially in our own within our own space. You always see special projects. But how do you ensure accountability and value for money, like I asked earlier? Because in this 2024 budget, you have service-wide votes of about 4.4 trillion naira. How have we used the last ones? Because they're contingency funds.
Well, the truth is not all service-wide votes are contingency funds. In fact, the contingency component of our service-wide vote budget is small. Okay, the concept of service-wide votes is, in addition to contingencies, there are expenditure items that cut across the entire service, so that you're not going to put in the budget of a single MDA. There are expenditure items that are to be subjected to further scrutiny at the point of spending, okay? Which also then gives you discretion whether to proceed with them at that point or not. And so those are the items that are captured in, under, service-wide, vote. So, service-wide votes, for instance, that's where we have all the pension, the pension provisions. The pension provisions are, maybe about 25% of, the number that you just quoted. The service-wide vote includes, that's where we capture spending like, for programs like the social investment program. These are that are subjected to further scrutiny at the point of incurring the expenditure. The service-wide vote include, provisions for 2024, for instance. The service-wide vote includes a provision of 1 trillion naira, which is under the public service wage adjustment. That's some provision made for in view of the ongoing discussions towards a new minimum wage and the consequential adjustment to personnel costs that will arise from from that. You can't determine how much of that. We don't even know what it will be. You can't determine how much of that will go to any particular agency. So you pack that in the service-wide vote.
Okay. Because that was actually my next question, and you really hit it there in terms of the wage award adjustments that Mr. President announced if it will be captured under the service-wide votes and how it has impacted this 2024 budget. But I think you've answered that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the next question is, let's take a look at even the assumptions of 2024 budget. You're looking at oil production of 1.78 million barrels per day. I know that we've started ramping up production. At least oil production has been increasing since last year. We have a benchmark price of $77.96. This morning, before I came in for this program, DG, I checked our oil price, international price, $78. So we're just about 4 cents short of that this morning. FX rate of $800, 800 naira to $1. I also do know that in the last few years, that for oil price, for example, we have stayed within the limit. Apart from, I think, 2020, where we had a bit of misalignment, that oil prices dropped. How optimistic, how visible are these assumptions? Because many of the assumptions, we don't even get to meet them. GDP growth of 3.88%. We did about 3.1% last year, even though in President Buhari's 2023 budget, you had assumed 3.75% GDP growth. So speak to me as regards to the feasibility of these assumptions. And I also know their projections, DG, because I know you tell me their projections now, but just speak to me as to why these assumptions were crafted initially.
Well, again, let me start. You started with oil price, so let me start there. In terms of oil price assumptions, oil price assumptions are not based on the current spot market, but we take inputs from people knowledgeable in this business, people whose business it is to project oil price, internationally, and then we arrive at an informed, estimate of where they will be. Let me make the point that when you talk about oil price projection, anything is possible when in terms of oil price. Oil price may end up way above, where we are, what we've projected, or way, below. All it takes, for instance, is just, if God forbid, you have one pandemic that breaks out, in the year, like COVID, prices will tank. If you have a war break out somewhere in the Middle East, the prices could shoot up. So many economists have endangered their careers by trying to sound, too knowledgeable about oil price, projections. But what is our record? Our record shows that if you go back the last 8 years, every year, the actual oil price has been higher than the price that we assumed in the budget.
Yeah.
So I don't know, on one hand, you try to evaluate us based on historical antecedent, but when it comes to oil price, you're not ready to do so. I think you should give us some credit.
Okay.
That we know what we're doing when it comes to oil price projections. So in terms of the exchange rate, okay, again, the exchange rate that you see in the budget is projected average for last year. So it's finally at 800 naira. So again, that's not based on current spot. It's an indication of how the monetary and fiscal authorities see the currency going.
Okay.
Government is addressing all of the issues. It's a supply and demand issue. We currently have way more demand for dollars today than the supply.
Okay, DG, we just have about DG. Sorry to cut you short. We just have about less than a minute, but I need to chip this in. Earlier on, you had talked about subsidy.
Yes.
We know that subsidy, of course, the president said no subsidy. Is there a provision for partial subsidy in this 2024 budget? Bearing in mind that the president, through his spokesperson, announced earlier, we know we are in Nigeria, we know that we've not seen an adjustment in fuel price. So one way or the other, government is paying subsidy. How is government getting that money to pay for that partial adjustment, even though the government is saying that there is no subsidy?
there's no provision for subsidy in the budget. But what you have is, if you look at the template, if you look at the template for petroleum pricing, okay, beyond the landed cost of the product, there are a number of elements there which go to government agencies. And so basically, what government has done for now is withhold some of those. For instance, VAT is suspended, import duty is not applied. Some of the charges for whatever lightering and all of those that NPA want. So basically, government has withheld. So when you go to the budgets of the agencies that would have collected that, you will see that they withheld provision for those.
Okay.
That's how that's at best how this is. But as the situation improves and stabilizes, and basically we go to full implementation of the pricing template.
Okay. I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, DG, for joining me this morning. I think we've had an extensive discussion so far on on budgeting in Nigeria and the 2024 budget. I wish we could go on, but let's see what happens subsequently. But thank you very much for joining me this morning. Even though you're on vacation, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it, and thank you for honoring this invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and not actually on vacation. But
Okay. That was our last discussion, but it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I wish I was, because I'm waiting for one. I'm trying to take one sometime soon.
Okay. Because you need it.
I haven't started.
Okay.
I had indicated that I would. I had hoped that I would be.
You would go.
By,
okay.
By now. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
All right. I've been speaking with the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze, and we've been looking at budgeting in Nigeria. That's so much we can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you for joining